When I was a kid, I loved nativity scenes, and it's funny. My mom, who was in charge, she definitely decorated our house. My dad didn't really have those skills, and she had lots of stuff she would pull out for Christmas, and she'd decorate the whole house, and the house was full. It was always very beautiful, but she wasn't into nativity scenes. I don't even know why, but that's interesting. So I would, during the Christmas season, I'd go to my grandparents' house, I'd go to my friend's house, I would go wherever. And if they had nativity scenes, I'd always get over there and kind of get down and look at them, those little figures and that little stable, however it was built, and I would just peer into it, and it grabbed my imagination. The Mary and Joseph and the baby down there in the manger, and the shepherds would be hanging out, and they have their big staffs, and then they'd suspend a star kind of over it, and then there would be an angel or two there. And when I was a kid, I really got off on the angels. I was so fascinated. Having wings, that would be just so cool, I was mesmerized. I think that's one of the reasons we love angels so much. They get to fly around. What a great job, man. And so I was mesmerized by that, but as I got older, my shift turned towards what had been called the three kings or the three wise men or the three wise ones, or sometimes they're called the magi. This is why I asked Alan to play this song this morning, and I really appreciate that. There's something, and I was caught up with them because, their camels were always kind of parked outside, waiting for them, the three camels. The camels were decorated really beautifully, with all kinds of symbolism, and I've always been drawn to symbolism in my life, and they would be there, and they always kind of stood out because they were decorated. They were generally very colorful characters. Everyone else was kind of earth tones. They'd be very colorful, the reds and blues and golds, and they would have these treasures with them, and I never really resonated with them called kings. I don't know why. I always thought the wise ones, these great masters, these mysterious figures from another part of the world. And I remember some years ago, it wasn't very long ago, I went to a big craft show somewhere, and someone had brought forward kind of a Native American rendition of it, and these three people had the regalia of being healers and holy ones and medicine people, and the amulets around their necks and stuff. I thought it was so cool that someone had created that. And so I think about their story, the idea that so allowing my imagination to go wild. I think about them. Where were they? Where were they when they saw the star? Were they in some temple up on a mountain somewhere? Were they in some old monastery? Were they in some encampment somewhere, or a very maybe they were in a ceremonial place where they would go annually to do a ceremony of some kind or a ritual, or were they around a fire or something? And so if we go with the idea of being, let's say, a temple or monastery in the Himalayas or someplace like that, somewhere in the world. So we go in there and we see this incredible room, filled with books and charts and tables and incense and icons and tapestries, and we've got these people, and they're poring over their books, and they're debating things and asking questions, and they're moving into all the spiritual ideas and philosophies, and they're arguing, and they're debating, and they're teaching each other and learning from each other. And so one of them, one night he kind of goes over towards a window, and he looks out at the sky, and he's feeling inspired. And then all of a sudden, out there somewhere is this light, and it's like, wait a minute, that's an odd star, that's an odd light. So he goes to some astrological chart they have, some dusty old book, and he brings it. He looks at that part of the sky. No, this is new. This is something that is coming forth, and it's mystical, it's mysterious. And so, what do you think this is? And so they would talk about it, and they would wonder what new idea has come forward within the broad spiritual paradigm in terms of how we live our lives. And this was so mesmerizing to them and so mysterious that they loaded up the camels, they threw their stuff on the camels, and they got their regalion, and they started to move. And so I'm speaking very metaphorically right now and very dramatically, but if we bring in the reality of the time when this mythology came forward, this story came forward, traveling by camel is kind of a slog. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they don't run really fast. So you're going over mountains and through deserts and maybe forests and all kinds of stuff, and it takes them a long time to get there. But there's something that keeps them going, seeking. And I remember as a little kid, I was a really weird little kid. I would speak to what some people called inanimate objects. And I would, so I had my little cowlick hair and stuff. And if I was in my grandparents' house, I'd make sure nobody was around. And I'd get down there and I'd kneel down and get at eye level. And I'd look at those guys and go, "What are you looking for? What brought you here?" And these guys are only mentioned in one chapter in the Gospels in Matthew. Not mentioned anywhere else. But the story goes that, when they were there and they brought their gifts and they hung out for a while, that they got back on the camels and they moved out because there's this talk about how they left the country and they kind of scooted out of the country. They wanted to get out of there. They didn't like the politics that were going on or whatever. They came and got their thing and they moved on. So as a little kid, I would go, where'd you come from? What are you looking for? And then where are you going? This idea of seeking. For my money, this is just Andy. I like to look at things, I like to look at the world with the idea of archetypes. It's been really useful in my own spiritual journey. And when I think of Ernest Holmes, I say, what's the archetype of Ernest Holmes? The guy who brought together our movement, did all this writing, and I think of the wise ones. I can see Holmes on a camel, you know what I'm saying? I can see him, out there looking for stuff, going through libraries, dusting off books, looking, seeking, searching. When you read any of the biographical material about his life, that's what you'll find. He was looking, he was looking, he was looking. He went through Christian Science. He went through Emma Curtis Hopkins. He went through other teachers. Then he kind of started his own thing. Didn't even know what to call it for a while. He was speaking on Sunday afternoons in movie theaters before it ever got put down into print. And finally it's written, and he starts collecting some people around him. He started out he grew up in New England, came to Southern California, and in the early part of the 20th century, can you imagine the characters in Southern California in terms of, because what was interesting about America in the early 20th century was on both coasts, the West Coast and the East Coast, were things like salons, people coming together, coffee houses. I don't know if you ever read much about John Steinbeck when he was in Monterey with Ed Ricketts and those guys, hanging out with all these poets and artists, and when Carmel was truly an artist colony, a bunch of poor artists out there in a bunch of shacks in Carmel, painting and writing and poetry and listening to records on opera and all this kind of stuff. Reading up on Buddhism and Taoism and native traditions and philosophy, the classics, exploring all this. When I was when I had the Center for Spiritual Living in Paradise, I was just a brand new minister, and so we had these monthly practitioner meetings, and there was a large number of practitioners at that time, and so we would spend part of our time talking about the prayer requests amongst the community and what's going on with people spiritually and what's going on with families. Somebody lost their loved one, someone has got some employment issues, someone has got a diagnosis or whatever. And then we always would spend some time to kind of sit around and talk spiritually and philosophically. We would bring up topics. And this one time, this is really interesting, and I don't remember even who brought it up, it said, you know, we call ourselves seekers all the time. Should we actually call ourselves finders? And that's an interesting question metaphysically, because if I'm a seeker, am I always pushing the, using the language of seeker, am I always pushing the truth away from me? If I'm a finder, then I'm declaring that I found it. And so we mulled that over for a while, and we all had our own ideas. And about the same time as that, and I was thinking about the idea, the power of being the seeker, and how I can really relate to it, and how I kind of project this onto Ernest Holmes. And my wife, Judy, started a book study. She felt led to start a book study, and she called it the Socrates Cafe. They met once a week, and there wasn't a set book. It's like whoever came, they were very democratic. You know, someone would bring a book forward, some kind of spiritual book, didn't matter what it was. There were no constraints at all. And so they would all, whatever book, they agreed on it, and they would read it, and they'd talk about it for a couple weeks, and they'd move on to other books. Oh my God, this thing exploded. She had a huge group. And on Sundays, because we had a bookstore, and she was the person who ran our bookstore, and it was kind of this room off of the social hall. It was kind of open in front, and it was kind of off. And she would sit in there behind a desk selling books and stuff. And oh my God, the Socrates Cafe people would go in there. You could not get near that desk. You could not buy a book. You couldn't do anything because they were all in there. And they would talk and talk and talk. And it caught their imaginations. It's like they couldn't even wait for Wednesday to come around. This idea of what inspires us. What are we looking for? And the reason that I resonate with the idea of seeker is because I think that just like those people who looked out the window and saw the star, what I've found is I've lived my life to this point, getting older and things happening. Children are there, children go out in the world. Jobs change, I get older, people change, the face in the mirror looks different. There are all kinds of stimulations that cause me to continue to seek. My spiritual life is different today than it was at 30, 40, and 50. And what I love is I can still seek. Ernest Holmes says, the Christ comes alike to each of us as principle, as material giving way to spirit-centered thinking, as division gives way to unity. I love that. Because in what I just said to you about the face being different in the mirror, the children leaving, the jobs changing, the moving, the town burns down, whatever it is. What's one of the first things that happens to me? I start to feel duality. And I need a regrounding in the unity. And today, I have to look for that differently than I did when I was 35 years old. Charles Fillmore says, the wise ones from the East represent the soul stirred by great spiritual revelation rising up. And Fillmore indicates that that happens throughout our lifetimes. And throughout lifetimes, different ways that our soul is stirred up. The I Ching, which is a sacred book from China, it was called the Book of Change in China. It came about somewhere between 1000 and 750 BCE. And in this bookstore, I don't know if it's still there, but there was a rendition of it by Brian Walker Brown, an interpretation. And I tell you, this book, I bought it here at this center about, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago. You ought to see it. I got notes all through it. I've underlined stuff. This book's been amazing. And Brian Walker Brown shares in his rendition Listen and watch attentively for truth, from whatever source it may rise out of. The goodness allows for graceful living, practiced through aligning with universal harmony. For the creative nature of good is, indeed, the creative nature of spirit. The wise ones were looking for the good, the light. When we hear the word light, when we think of stars, when we think of angels, how does that inspire us? Transformation, growth, moving forward, evolution, healing, wisdom, guidance. That's what we're looking for. That's why on a Sunday there are so many people in different churches in this town, in this state, in this country, in this world today. People looking for something to move into that speaks to them of the goodness of love, the goodness of God, the goodness of Spirit. That's what they're looking for. That's what we're looking for. And how to use that. Recently, I spent some time with a man who was dealing with a very severe appearance and experience with cancer. In fact, this gentleman I'm speaking of made his transition just this week. And a while back, I went and spent some time with him because, he's been in my life for a long time. And he lives out of state. He lived forever here in California, lives out of state, and so I had to make the journey to go see him. And so when I was there, he had some sort of oncology appointment, so I wanted to go with him, and his daughter and I went, and he was really feeling the effects of not just the cancer, but the medications and everything. The gentleman I'm speaking of is a fundamentalist Christian, evangelical. And we were sitting there, and we were just kind of talking. And all of a sudden he said, and he's a man who was a truck driver here in California on the West Coast for his whole career. He drove trucks for over 30 years. And the last 20 years that he drove trucks, he was driving out of a yard in West Sacramento for some company, some freight company. And he met a woman when he was working out of there from Davis. And I guess she might have been a truck driver too, I'm not sure, but somehow they got to know each other. And he said to me, this woman I know, she messaged me a prayer. And it was the most loving thing I've ever read, and it made me feel so good and so cared for and so loved. I said, well, that's wonderful. He said, she calls herself New Age. And she's a lesbian. And there's Christians who tell me I shouldn't have anything to do with her. But anybody who can pray like that, I consider them to be someone very special. Wow. His cancer sent him to the window to find a star. And he journeyed through another religion and another lifestyle to find the star. And what he found there was the truth. Brian Walker Brown goes on with this. Coming into complete harmony with what the universal directs or higher consciousness always represents a far-reaching influence. Just as the sun shines and its illumination and warmth draws us in for obvious reasons. I love that. We are drawn in for obvious reasons. The illumination and the warmth. A woman who he could not have anything less in common with except they drove trucks, offers up a prayer that touched him deeply. And I believe that that prayer was very much on his heart through the remainder of the time he was here before he crossed into the veil. Because that's what seeking helps us find. Would he have been open to that if it weren't for the cancer? I don't think so. That became the vehicle by which he followed the star. I love this aspect of our teaching, metaphysics, that allows us to move into all the stages of our life, all the stages of our experiences, gazing towards the stars. Thank you very much, you guys. Namaste. All right. So, now